Welcome to the Expert Network Team podcast,
where our goal is to inform and educate listeners on matters of finance, legal, insurance, and other interests that are of personal and business nature.
We hope you enjoy the information contained in today's podcast and find it useful.
We'd like to introduce your Expert Network team of professionals.
I'm Carl Frank, owner and financial planner at A&I Wealth Management. I work with clients to help them grow and protect their investments and choose how they want to be taxed.
I'm Jeff Krommendyk, a managing principal of One Digital Insurance. I work with individuals and businesses to help them understand their risk exposure and lead them to risk transfer solutions that best fit their needs.
I'm Nathan Merrill, founder and attorney at Goodspeed Merrill, providing advanced tax strategy and private client legal services to affluent families and entrepreneurs.
Together, our independent team combines our expertise to provide you insights and solutions, some straightforward, some profound, addressing real-life opportunities we see on a daily basis.
If you'd like to learn more or desire to meet with any of the Expert Network team professionals in person, you can contact us at info@expertnetworkteam.com. That's info@expertnetworkteam.com.
We encourage you to take advantage of a free consultation with any of our professionals. Just mention this podcast when you schedule your appointment.
Without further delay, please enjoy today's podcast.
Welcome to today's podcast. Today we have a really interesting and fascinating guest with us here today. I'm Nathan Merrill, and I'm here with Jeff Krommendyk of One Digital Insurance. And our guest today, and I think we've been teasing this for a while, Roey, so you got to live up to expectations here. We've got Roey Diefendorf with us today. And Roey has a really interesting story to tell us, and I think wisdom to share with us. I'll let you, Roey, give a lot of your background, but I would say one of the pioneers in this area of wealth, family planning for wealth preservation. I don't know a better way to say it right off the top of my head, but you come from a multi-generational family that has seen success in transferring wealth and the responsibilities surrounding wealth for now 5 successive generations. Perhaps you can just start by telling us a little bit about yourself and your family history so we can have a framework and a foundation for our discussion today.
Well, that was a good intro about living up to expectations, because that's exactly what I walked into. You know, I had a great-grandfather who founded the business. This was in 1875. And back then, you know, in terms of, you know, financial world, the average life expectancy was 47 years old. And so people didn't really have to plan for retirement because they died in their chair and their desk, right? So what was the venue or the vehicle? Life insurance, right? And so the first life insurance company in America was Mutual of America, and became Mutual of New York. And so my great-grandfather was one of the early pioneers, and in fact had the largest life insurance agency in the world.
Wow.
And was the founder of the Life Underwriters Association. It's gone on to become now the largest association. I think there's 380,000 members now. It's financial services, but he was the founder of that. So you go from that beginning, and as the baton got passed, my grandfather came along, and again, largest life insurance agency in the world, died prematurely, and so there was a little hiatus. There was a little gap in there where my, I guess really wasn't my father's uncle, but there was a cousin who stepped in and bridged the gap while my father was going through, school and college, and then out of the service. So he came back and he said, well, I'm here to get into the business. And the answer was, what business? It's my business. And so he said, all the clients now and the whole thing is mine. So my father had to really sort of start from ground zero again.
Wow.
And built it up into where he had the largest insurance agency of Mutual of New York in the country, and yeah, had some pretty good reputation. So here I come through with rock stars in the past. In fact, when I go out to industry meetings, my father's nickname was the Legend. I go, oh gosh, he said, how's the Legend? And so if you have to live up to that, talk about great expectations, right? And I was in deathful fear of being the guy that screws this whole thing up, right?
Right.
And so fear was my motivator. And but the other thing I can tell you is that when I came in, my father said, listen, Roey, he said, just because your name is Diefendorf doesn't mean that everybody's going to roll over and play dead. He said, it might get you in the door. He said, but you better know what you're doing. He said, there's no replacement for education. And so I took that seriously. In fact, he said, I was sitting on the couch. He said, you know, Mickey Mantle's sons wanted to play baseball. He said, so we got him the batting auditions. Only one trouble. He says, they couldn't hit. And so he said, there you are. He said, you'll get the audition. You'll get in the doors probably because of the name, but it's up to you. And so if you looked at my pedigree, I probably got more degrees than a thermometer. And, I went at it and I said, okay, I'm going to be the best that I can be, because I didn't want to be the one that dropped the ball. And so it was a tremendous amount of pressure. And again, I sold my first insurance policy before I got out of high school, and
wow.
Worked through college doing that, went to graduate school and got a master's degree in life insurance. I mean, you can think about, what that means, but that put me sort of ahead. And next thing you know, I'm in the world of, it came out, it was ERISA. So there were retirement, plans just coming out. And what I was able to do though, Nate, is I re-engineered myself probably every decade.
Well, I was looking at that. And so I wanted to ask you a couple of questions about your personal professional history. And then you answered a little bit of this already, but you worked alongside with your dad for a good portion for your entire career, or just while you were in insurance? But
well, no, while we started all of it in ERISA. So in this office, I began the third-party pension administration actuarial firm. So for our family, I ran that for probably 17 years, and until the time that we sold it. And
that was part of the family organization.
Yeah, all of the things that we did were part of that.
Okay.
And so then we began doing fee-based financial planning back in 1981. And that was before there was a financial planning program designation. It was the Wild West. Anything went. There were no regulations and no curriculum. And but that was the future. And so I then ran that department and built up a fee-based financial planning firm within the organization. And then as we went along, and the reason we sold the actuarial firm, we were the first ones in the pension administration to actually go cross-family of funds in the 401k area. In those days, if you had Oppenheimer didn't want to send their money to Fidelity, and Fidelity didn't want to send their money to someplace else. And I said, well, what if we were to break down the walls and be able to go cross-family of funds, do it all no load waived. And so we put that program together, and we had a group of 65 actuarial firms we pulled together, and off we were. Well, it wasn't too far down the road when I realized that every night there were more funds being being transmitted than the Diefendorf family had. And if something were to go wrong and someone fell asleep at the switch, I could blow the whole thing up. And so I said, well, you better know when to hold him and when to fold him. And I thought, you know what, to get to this next level and the amount of capital commitment. So then I said, okay, I'll sell that part of it, and we'll just handle the assets. So then we went into the RIA space in all, fee-based planning and, RIA work, assets under management, and we ran the retirement monies. And so we had a big block of, assets that we have. And as I was going along down the road, just fast forward, now I'm probably 30 years into my career, and I had 50 years door to door. About 30 years in, now I start to see the deaths occurring. And again, this is with some of my grandfather's clients and my father's generation. And I'm always like the generation behind. So now we have them, and we've gone probably now 20 years in a row with about 3 deaths every month. Okay. So you start to see what happens at the end. Some people, they work their whole life and then they retire because their buddies are retiring, and they never get to see the longitudinal study of what happens. Well, sure. I could see it happening, and I realized that the things that we were doing didn't work out the way that we planned. So
is this that 1995 timeframe?
Yeah,
we're talking about.
Yeah.
So if I was to say that a different way, and I think people will be a little surprised that we're not going to spend a lot of time talking to you about your professional history, but like I said, I think that background is important because it provides a framework for an understanding where we're going next, which is seeing this transition of wealth, seeing like you say, as the plan is going into effect or the plan is winding down, the impact that has. So talk a little bit about what you started seeing happening in that 1995 timeframe.
All right. So now I'm watching these plans that we put together. And when someone would die, and I thought we'd done a great job, next thing you know, I find the heirs are suing each other. It doesn't work out the way we thought it was. And I said, what went wrong, right? And so I sat down and I said, what is it that the clients really want? And I took a big board and I put them down. And when all was said and done, it was all about relational and emotional, nothing about financial. In other words, they didn't come in and say, Jeff, how do I get an extra 30 basis points on my investment? What they would say to me, Jeff, is, I don't want my kids to fight over this. I would want this to be entitlement, right? And so what I realized is that in the industry, we were answering questions that my clients weren't asking. So I said, okay, let me sit back. I'm going to listen to the questions they're asking, and then I'm going to figure out how to answer the questions they have. And I then did another shift at that point. Well, tie in the same time with my dad, because I think this is an important factor. We had watched so many family businesses. We had, several hundred family businesses as clients. And my father said, the biggest mistake I can watch and I've seen is that the, lead guy, the generation, hangs on too long. He doesn't know when to get out. He said, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you the day that I am stepping aside. 7 years from now. And he said, we have 7 years to work on the transition plan. And he said, at that point, it's up to you. He said, now in the meantime, if you slip and stub your toes, I'm there to help you along the way. But that was the plan. Now, that's when you talk about going a 5th generation, I took that as my model. I did the same thing. So that generational piece is now we're working. He's getting off the ramp and I'm getting on the ramp simultaneously, and we're working at it. But he had a point in time and he did not back off to the day. And so that was the day that happened.
So is that he stepped away from the business, but I assume he still played a role in the family or kind of the family organization as a leader, or?
Absolutely. I mean, that okay. Was until probably another 25 years, of that. Yes. But so in the day-to-day of running the operation.
Yeah, I think that, like you say, it's important that, especially in family enterprises, and we kind of have to separate the family enterprise from the family wealth, because not all wealthy families necessarily run businesses. It could have been earned other ways, could be inherited wealth, but to your point, that one of the mistakes that wealth creation generations make is they retain authority over the wealth creation for too long and don't transition that or endear that responsibility to the next generation until it's too late.
Yeah, I think the statistics would say it's less than 10% go into the third generation as far as business and wealth generating mechanisms, right? So to see that type of planning go on in your family, Roy, is really fascinating. And then there's obviously the family side of the leadership and so on and so forth that needs to continue.
So an interesting perspective here that you have, and that you're probably itching to introduce this, but I want to hear you talk about it because I've read your book, is this concept of 3D wealth management, which introduces a concept beyond normal portfolio theory. You know, we obviously are careful on this podcast not to give investment advice, but the 3D wealth management concept that you came up with is not investment advice per se. It's how you structure your portfolio in terms of its purpose. Perhaps you can talk a little bit about how that idea came to you.
Well, the idea of redefining wealth into more than money, right? So if you're redefining wealth, and that was the concept, is your wealth is your personal side, your personal wealth, who you are, your financial wealth, what you have, and your social wealth, how to make a difference. And so if we're going to redefine wealth, what you would do is, it's hard to quantify. I mean, obviously with dollars, you can multiply them, divide them, graph them, chart them. You can do all these things. It's easy. But how do you then quantify intangible wealth, right?
Right.
Your values and things. So I went on this mission to say, can we now somehow create the family as an asset class and allocate resources to help preserve and protect the family as a unit, and in doing that, help to strengthen the personal wealth in the family and help to utilize the social wealth as a unifying and intergenerational interdependence, if you will. So that was the initial start. Now, when I wrote that book in 2005, it was the theory, right? I was coming off of the questions that the clients had asked. I saw the problems that had been occurred because we prepared the money for the heirs, but we never prepared the heirs for the money. And my dad did it a little different, right? He saw that and he said, well, I'm going to start to prepare you. But we were leaving the rest of our clients and client base behind in that. And I go, got to change. And so that's when I said, what am I going to do in order to make a difference? And that was the introduction of using a trust company. So we had a public trust company chartered in South Dakota in order to start to look at doing values-based trusts and try to identify the values in a family and how we're going to perpetuate that. So that kind of tied in as well. But then the mission goes beyond that, is how do we really proactively work on preparing the heirs, and what can we do? And I realized in my attempt to do that I was probably the biggest impediment to accomplishing that, because everything flowed through to me by entity. So in other words, as I'm working with a family, I'm getting input from one family member, input from another family member. I'm trying to aggregate the data. I'm getting tied up in a lot of administration and preparing for a meeting. And I go, if we don't put this into some kind of technology platform, it'll never have any chance of being effective, especially for larger families where the more complexity and more people, but it'll never happen. So I went on a mission to figure out how I might integrate technology into the family.
So before we go there, I do want to talk a little bit more about this and make sure I understand that this 3D wealth concept, where you say using the family, its intangibles as an asset class, because I believe in your book you talk about a methodology or a formula for assigning to that purpose a certain amount of the financial assets devoted to building up those intangibles or preserving those intangibles. Because presumably, if I'm to interpret your theory or your premise right, is if you don't develop the family, then all the wealth in the world won't matter, because you have not only the potential for squandering it, but you have the bickering, the fighting, the family destruction plan, as it were. So talk a little bit about how you kind of formulaically or methodologically came up with that process of assigning a value, or how you come up with, how does someone come up with a value to put into that bucket?
Okay, so two things is in the software, the asset allocation software that we have. So as an investment advisor, every quarter I'm looking at the portfolios, we're rebalancing the portfolios, we're trying to come back to bring them back into line. So, if we're trying to mitigate the risk. And so if we find out that too much is being now, because of growth, is allocated towards technology, how are we going to cut it back? So we're always bringing it back to the norm. And always with the mindset of we're creating more money.
Right.
And that was the point, is that that's not the answer, right? The answer can be, and especially with ultra high net worth families, the answer then becomes more money is more hurtful than helpful. And there's a point of diminishing returns where it becomes a problem, right? In fact, the clients that I have, the wealthier ones, the question I start with, I said, let me ask you, are you worried about the damage that the money might do to your children and grandchildren? And they go, that's it. We got all the money we need. We don't need more money. That's not the problem. And yet what we're doing as investment managers and, attorneys and trying to keep everything we're trying to figure out how to get more money. But that's not what they're asking, right? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So
I can't
said,
remember
all
if it
right.
was you or someone else you quoted, called it the Frankenstein that ate its creator or something like that. Was that your quote? Yeah.
So I mean,
The
that's
monster, the Frankenstein that ate its creator or whatever. But
so, Rory, what are the other two dimensions? I mean, we've got the financial, and then I think you said
personal,
relational personal and social.
And social.
Okay.
I mean, you can have 4 dimensions, 5 dimensions. I mean, that was just, I only can count up to 3, so I added it 3. But obviously, spiritual component comes into that can tie into a personal.
Sure.
And so, but what I wanted to do is then say, what does it take in order to prepare now the heirs for the money? In the research, what we found is that there were really 5 areas, I call them pillars, 5 areas that if we concentrated on and helped families strengthen it, we could do a lot of good. That is communication, identifying values, building gratitude in families, the legacy that they want to leave, and the governance structure. So those 5 areas. And so in the idea of getting an advisory team to work on those, what would it cost for a family to engage that and hire and have people that would have regular family meetings? I mean, for me, if I don't have a client or a family that is going to have consistent family meetings, I'm not interested, right? Again, at my age, I'm usually the oldest guy in the room these days. At my age, I don't have enough runway, right? I don't want to waste the time. And if someone's not committed to a process and a continuing of getting better, it takes work to be a generative family, right? And to last beyond this 2 or 3 generations. So, what does it take? And depending on the size of the family and what they want to do, but I could identify in my mind, okay, this would be the annual allocation necessary in order to provide the facilitators, to provide for the venue for having that, and ideally, you're going to create a trust that's the purpose. The purpose of the trust is to continue to facilitate and help the family grow in their more than money wealth, right? Because here's the other thing I found is these, ultra high net worth families, they would, their alma mater would say, gee, we need to endow a chair at the school and we'd like to put the Merrill name there. So can you put up some money for that? And the families would do that. and they would allocate their funds in order to educate children that they've never met. However, they would never think about putting the same resources or some resources to educate their own heirs on what's most important, their family. So our job was to say, okay, what does it take to allocate resources? And again, if I do it in a trust, then it's done. In other words, once it's in the trust, we allocate. And let's say it's $100,000 a year, and I'm getting 5%. So do I allocate 2 million of my worth? And I allocate 2 million to that because I know that the 5% is going to generate $100,000, which will help to prepare every year, year in, year out, family menu, everything else, trust fees, and now it's there. This is how we do business as a family, right? And it's the mechanism there. Now, I want to practice it while I'm still alive. I've heard some people go, well, yeah, when I die, it's all going to go into place. They go, wrong. I mean, like my dad, we practiced, we rehearsed everything that was going to happen up until the day he died. And the day he died, we had been through it. It was like game day. We know what to do. It wasn't like we showed up and said, well, what's the position? What's the plays? I knew what everything was supposed to happen, right? So it's the same concept. And so now I say, all right, we need to allocate $2 million of our stuff towards preparing the heirs for the money. So now when I get my asset allocation, what I do is I'd say, okay, I'm going to put $2 million allocated towards family advancement and sustainability. And in order to do that, I dial the dials and something goes down, so this goes up. My favorite thing of this is when I'm telling one of my clients, I said, listen, in order to allocate funds for your family, we're going to have to dial down your emerging markets. And he goes, emerging markets? I don't give a damn about emerging markets. I care about my family. Exactly, right? And so you dial it down. And it might take 2%. It might take 3% of it, whatever it is, but it's an insignificant amount to do the most important thing for their family, right? And again, right. What I'm saying is we're going to take that money and instead of investing it and reinvesting it, take the dividends and capital gains and reinvest it in the asset allocation, we're going to take the dividends and capital and we're going to invest it back in preparing the heirs for the family, right? That whole concept. Now, in order to get there, you've got to redefine wealth. You got to think outside and say, hey, there's more to assets than stocks and bonds and cash and something, there's family. And when you make family an asset class and you can tangibly put it into your software, and all I had to do, I would back it in. I'd say, okay, this is how much it's going to take. And I knew that, when these people had a family forum, they weren't going to do it at, McDonald's. They were going to, Turks and Caicos for a week, and they're going someplace. And so I understood that it was going to take resources, and I just, reverse engineer, and I'd have it there. And now it's set. Because if we leave it up to the family, right, there's got to be a family leader in this. If the family leader says, you know what, this is important, then you make the decision, you memorialize it, and then that's how you do business, as opposed to saying to the family, what do you think? This year, should we have a family forum? And
no, absolutely.
Says, no, I don't think so. But, we don't mind going to Turks and Caicos and, buy some pina coladas. But where is the, you can have fun. That's good. But where is the education in that process that's necessary? Where is the governance review that's necessary? And so you make it, you're wrap it in something that's going to be fun as opposed to punishment. But if you leave it up to every year having to make the decision, Jeff, you're in the insurance business. They used to say, you could pay the premiums, monthly, quarterly, semi-annually, annually, right? And people used to say to me, well, what do you think I should do? I mean, how should I pay it? I said, let me ask you, are you the type of person that when you pay your insurance premium, you go home and you say, hey, honey, I just paid the insurance company. Let's celebrate. Or you're the type of person that goes home and says, I just paid the insurance premium. I think I'm going to throw up. Guy goes, that's me. I want to throw up. I said, all right, would you like to throw up 12 times a year or once a year? Right? I want the decision to be once and done. In fact, we know from the statistics that if you're paying it monthly, the chances of having those insurance policies lapse are far greater. Yeah. And the same thing quarterly. And so if you're doing it, if I do this one and done for a family and I put it in a trust and this is how we do business, I've got a successful,
you got at least a new baseline. You got a new point from which you're operating, and you've set up well. I think where we want to go. We're running out of time on this podcast, but I think it's where I want to go when we reconvene is the things that you do now that you've got this fund set up. What are the things that fund is focused on putting into effect? And I'd love to talk through some of those ideas. I'd love to talk through the technology you've developed, but this journey that you've taken us through in terms of your family getting through 4 or 5, now 5 generations, I think is not to set you up too much, but you're a model for many, I think, to at least look at and regard when deciding how to approach their own family succession, which is, I think, something valuable that we've learned today.
Yeah, except I'll tell you this, going to the 5th generation was the most difficult thing I've ever done.
Can you tell us about that starting the next podcast?
I will.
Awesome.
And I have one more last qualifying question, because we do have listeners that are kind of all over the board, right? They're not even thinking about, passing their wealth, what little there may be, on to the next generation. And then there's, certainly those that this is very interesting to. But Rory, you've been talking about ultra net worth. And the other thing I love about this is the intentionality around family meetings and planning and legacy. Where's the entry point? Maybe from just a financial wealth perspective, where are you seeing most families get really serious about this? At what level of wealth, or is this something for everybody? Just if you could just finish off with that, and then we'll go on to the next podcast here.
Really, I would say total wealth, 3-dimensional wealth is for everyone. I mean, great. The problem is that I know, for example, as a financial advisor, I could have walked up and down the street in front of my building, and there's any person I would have run into, I'm absolutely confident I could help them. However, if I did that, I would have gone out of business. In other words, I walk out and I see the guy cutting my lawn. Could I help him? Sure, I could. And I see the person who's selling, stuff at the deli. Could I help him? Yeah, of course I could. Except that, I also have the ability to deal with the people who ran multi-million-dollar businesses and that. Mm-hmm. So I had to make a decision that right. I would be strategic. I would walk past some, and I didn't want to be sort of elitist, like I'm better than them. However, I had the access or the education that allowed me to play in a different league, right? Some people play, AA baseball, and mm-hmm. some are AAA, and some play in the major leagues. I was able to play in the major leagues. However, in looking at your personal wealth, hey, listen, I know people who are financially wealthy and personally bankrupt. How good is that? On the other hand, I know people who are financially probably almost bankrupt, but personally wealthiest people you'd know. Right? Mm-hmm. And great. So when I look at that, it's for everyone. Now, the ultra high net worth, yeah, we're probably looking at people in excess of $20 million, and such. It's like when you start to do estate planning. Would you do estate planning with someone who's has $1 million? Well, yeah. Do they need wills and maybe trust? But it's a different level.
Yeah. Okay.
But I would my desire at some point would be, how do you take the technology and bring it down to mm-hmm. the masses? Right?
Great. Well,
that's the next generation.
Let's talk about that. Yeah.
Great discussion. Really appreciate the time with you today, Roey and Jeff. And I'm excited to get on with the conversation. So without further ado, we'll just close this segment and wish our listeners a beautiful day.
Absolutely. Thanks, Nate.
Thank you for joining us today. I hope you enjoyed the discussion and the information we shared.
We hope you enjoy the information contained in today's podcast and find it useful.
We hope you will join us again next time as we explore new areas of interest to our listeners or current issues we believe are important to discuss.
If you enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe so you are notified when future episodes are released, and also share it with a friend that you think would benefit.
If you'd like to meet with a member of the Expert Network team or have a request for a special topic you'd like to have us discuss on the podcast, submit those requests to info@expertnetworkteam.com. That's info@expertnetworkteam.com.
Thank you for joining us and have a great day.
Thank you for listening to this podcast. We want to remind you that listening to this podcast does not establish a client-professional relationship with any of the professional firms represented, including guests, nor does it constitute legal, investment, accounting, or other advice of a fiduciary nature. The views expressed are those of the professionals only.
Investment advisor services may be provided through A&I Wealth Management. Securities may be provided through Genios Wealth Management.